In macroeconomics, these sort of diagrams are very common, and these are usually called as four quadrants diagram. Generally speaking, in high school level, we understand every single concept and topic individually and graphs individually, and very rarely we see them connected with each other and to give you a very holistic picture. At this level, at upper high school or university level, you're supposed to connect all the dots, which is what macroeconomics is all about. We're trying to take all the microeconomic concept and put it into a big picture so we can get the idea of the economy as a whole. With that being said, in the previous video, we discussed how we can establish the production function, and how the production function can be used to derive the marginal product of labor, and why the shape of the curve is downward sloping. And we also touched about where the firms would want to employ, but I did not go into detail, which I would do so in this video since this is the entire topic altogether. Before we can get into the graphs specifically, there are few assumptions that we have to go through first, and the reason why we have to know all of these assumptions before we can actually start plotting the graph is because in classical economics, a lot of assumptions are made, and unless you understand those assumptions first, you're going to have a tough time answering questions, especially in examination, or a tough time writing a thesis, because a lot of the theories is dependent upon those assumptions, which may be true or which may not be true depending upon the circumstances we are in. So it's very important to understand the assumptions so you're able to critique the entire question adequately. So the first assumption we make is that the market is perfectly competitive, and we also assume that the producer and consumers are rational, meaning they all make rational decisions. Nobody is making rash decision. In modern economics, there's a term called behavioral economics. In modern economics, there is a term called behavioral economics, which is something that a lot of students are interested in these days. And behavioral economics is all about how individuals behave in an irrational manner. What can we do? What do people do irrationally that may not perfectly fit into our classical understanding of economics? So we assume, for the sake of argument, that all consumers are rational. Everyone's using their brain. Nobody is acting, emotionally or irrationally. We assume that there are no barriers of entry or exit in the market. Anyone who wants to enter the market can enter the market. Anyone who wants to exit the market can exit the market. Again, another assumption that is not true in real life. In real life, if I set up a business, if I want to exit the business, I need to sell my equipments, I need to sell all the materials that I own, which may take a lot of time. Or if I want to enter a market, there are regulations that I must first qualify, licenses that I must first take before I can enter the market. But in a classical system, we assume that there are no entry or exit to the market. Anyone who wants to enter can enter. Anyone who wants to leave can exit the market. We assume that everyone has perfect information or near perfect information, and all firms try to profit maximize. This is a key point because we know from our microeconomics that profit maximization point is where price is equal to marginal cost. And in real life, in modern economics, it may be true in the long term, companies do try to maximize profit, but perhaps in the short run they might want to maximize their sales. Who knows, maybe they want to just survive. Right now as I'm recording the video, with corona and the pandemic, most firms just want to survive. But different firms can have different short-term goals, but in a classical system we assume that all firms, at least in the long term, are trying to profit maximize. These are all the assumptions we make in order to understand the labor and employment in the market. And all these assumptions essentially mean two things, and it is these two things that we must keep in mind. Number one, the market is very rigid. The market is very rigid in the long term. What does that mean? Let's say that a firm is achieving a supernormal profit. Supernormal profit meaning they are achieving profit more than the cost. Let's say the profit or revenue is greater than the cost of production. That's the cost of production. What's going to happen if you have a situation like this? Other firms would be like, hey, this market has a lot of profit, maybe we can just enter that market. And if they enter the market, the supply would be increased, and when the supply increases, the prices would go down, and the profit would in the long term be equal to the marginal cost or the cost of production. The same thing can be said if the prices are too low. If the prices are too low, for example, let's say that the price or the profit made, let's write that profit. let's say the profit made is less than the cost, the firm would simply exit the market, because they'll be like, hey, you know what, there's a loss in the market. Because there are no barriers of entry, because there are no barriers of exit, they can exit the market, and the prices would go back up because of reduction in supply. And that would mean that in the long term, firms will go back to equilibrium. And this is the first diagram that we need to understand. This is our industries diagram. Let me clear all this stuff. And we're always gonna keep our equilibrium point where supply meets demand, because of what I've just discussed. If any price is less than the equilibrium, the firms would simply exit the market because the prices are too low. If any point is above the equilibrium, the firms would enter the market, bringing the prices down again back into equilibrium. And let's say that that equilibrium quantity is Q1. This is for the industry. What about the firm? The second assumption that we make is that firms are individual firms are price takers, which essentially means that whatever the wages are in the market, so whatever wages are in the market, wages of market, whatever the wages are in the market is going to be the same thing of the firm. The firm will not try to charge anything more, because if the firm's price charges or sets a wage higher than the market, they will make a loss, and they are going to lose out. They won't be profit maximizing. And if they set a wage lower than that of the market, because we assume that there's perfect information and all the consumers and producers are rational, labor would simply leave the company. They'll be like, hey, this company is paying us less than our value, we can just leave the company and we can just go somewhere else. Again, there are no barriers of entry, there are no barriers of exit. All consumers and producers are rational, which may not be true in real life, of course. And if we assume that P1, let's say that this point is P1, let's say that P1 is our equilibrium point, and if we assume that to be the equilibrium point, firms will employ where price is equal to marginal cost. Another assumption that we make is that marginal product of labor, MNP curve, is the same as marginal revenue product. What is marginal revenue product? Marginal revenue product is essentially revenue of one extra product. So as you hire more and more labor, what's going to happen to the revenue earned? Since this is a perfect market, and since the wages in the economy are the same as the prices in the economy, if the wages in the economy are the same as the prices in the economy, therefore the cost in the economy is the same as the profit earned. Since the consumers since this is a perfectly competitive market, all firms earn normal profit. Normal profit essentially means a point where a normal profit essentially means a point where all the cost is equal to all the revenue. Meaning whatever revenue we're gaining from the goods or services, we will use the revenue to pay the cost of. There's no extra revenue earned. Whatever revenue we are earning, we are paying it to our laborers, and that's pretty much it. Of course, in real life, companies earn more than the cost, and therefore they make profit. But we are assuming that whatever is the marginal product of labor is gonna be the same as the marginal revenue product, and firms will hire where price is equal to MRP, or where price is equal to marginal revenue product, which is point B over here. This is point B. Let's say this is point A. If the industry is in equilibrium, let me zoom in over here. Okay. If the equilibrium market is at point A with P1 Q1, firms will hire where the MRP curve, where the price meets the MNP curve, which is the same as the MRP curve, which is the same as the demand for labor in the economy. Again, something that is a little bit too mathematical and perhaps may not be easy to understand for the first time, but once you read the theory and understand the theory behind perfectly competitive market, it starts to make sense why we have this causation. And if that is our equilibrium point, let's just say this is W1, and if that is our equilibrium point, and if we can extrapolate that for the production function, the economy is gonna be producing at labor, let's call this point N1, and at production at Y1. And if you can extrapolate that for aggregate supply, that would be the income level Y1 over here. Again, this is a simple 4-quadrant diagram which helps us understand and basically connect all the dots whenever we have a change in labor, whenever we have a change in quantity or demand of a good. This is a microeconomic concept, but in macroeconomics we try to connect it with all other concepts that we know of. There is one specific curve that I intentionally skipped, that is the supply for labor, which might look something like that. This is the supply for labor. This is something that I will cover in the next video. I do not want to include it in this video because it might just make it a little bit too complicated. So hopefully you guys understood this 4-quadrant diagram, which helps us connect all the microeconomic concepts into a macroeconomic